Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Better Mode podcast. Before we begin, for those of you who are new to this podcast, I'll be sharing mainly about two main areas: personal financial management skills and life experiences I've accumulated. And now, let's begin today's topic. First, the root of income is the exchange of value. We give away a certain value, and in return, we receive a corresponding amount of compensation for the value we have created. Some people have always viewed work simply as getting a job, and the longer they work, the more promotions they get, and so on, following a pattern of inertia. But when we understand that the root of income is creating value, we will find ways to proactively increase our income instead of depending on handouts from others. And that is the foundation of today's discussion. As we know, income corresponds to the value we create for others. However, an important characteristic is that the amount of value doesn't necessarily have to be directly proportional to the effort and time invested. If we know how to build value, we can create value without being dependent on the amount of effort or time. And it is this crucial characteristic that leads us to what I consider the most important concept in personal finance: passive income. So what is passive income? It's income that doesn't depend on our limited resources like health, energy, or time. In simpler terms, it's income that we don't need to do anything about, yet it consistently brings us money. The reason passive income is important is because it frees us from the pressure of labor and time. We then use that time to build new sources of passive income, and so on. As a result, the amount of passive income we can generate is limitless. This is different from active income. No matter how high our income is, it always has a limit. In today's episode, I'll be sharing some suggestions for passive income streams. While these are quite common and widely used, they aren't the only ideas. Therefore, don't let these ideas limit you. Instead, view them as examples. They are meant to help you understand the true nature of passive income. From there, you yourselves will create additional sources of passive income. Now, let's move on to the first and perhaps most difficult source of passive income: buying a house and renting it out. The reason I chose this source of income to share with you first is because it's easy to understand, and I can use it to explain the subsequent sources of passive income. To obtain this income, we must somehow accumulate enough money to buy a house. After owning the house, we rent it out, and it continues to generate income for us. We don't have to do anything else. Even while we sleep, it silently generates additional income. Of course, saying we do absolutely nothing isn't entirely true, because we still have to do some things like maintaining the house or collecting rent. But the amount of effort we put in is very little. Not to mention, we could delegate all those tasks to a service company. That was my first source of income. In this section, I'll briefly mention another source of income that's very similar to renting out a house: renting out a car. This activity is quite similar to the first case and is already quite clear, so I won't explain it further. The problem with these two income sources is that they require a sufficiently large sum of money to start. Of course, we could take out a bank loan and use the rental income to pay for the house itself. But this method is more of an investment than a passive income stream. An investment is a different story outside the scope of today's discussion. And precisely because it requires such a large sum of money, it demands a lot of hard work to accumulate funds to build this passive income stream. However, this is also quite true for most other passive income sources. Passive income is not income where we do absolutely nothing. It's just that we have to work a lot at the beginning, and then once it's finished, we almost don't have to do anything anymore. That's the general nature of almost all passive income sources. The second type of passive income I want to share with you, which is also quite common, is income from savings interest. When you deposit money in a bank, I'm sure you're all familiar with this type of income, so I'll just briefly explain it. I'll focus on some more important points to note. When we deposit money in a bank, essentially we are giving money to that bank to do business for us. They will use this money to lend to others, and the profits will be shared with us through a form of. The method of paying interest can be understood simply as this. This source of income has two important characteristics. Firstly, it's similar to real estate income. It's very safe. Secondly, unlike real estate, which requires a very large amount of capital to start, this method allows you to start regardless of the amount of capital. However, when choosing this passive income source, there's a very important factor that many people forget: the rate of currency depreciation or inflation. To explain inflation simply, imagine that today you pay $2 for a burger, but next year, for example, you'll have to pay $2.50 to eat the same bowl of pho. That's currency depreciation. And this depreciation is completely normal in any economy. It's only abnormal when the rate of depreciation is too high. And because there will be a certain inflation rate everywhere, our task is to know how to analyze and consider whether the interest rate of a particular bank we are choosing is winning against the rate of inflation. Let's assume that if not, then it means our money is going downhill, not uphill, even though we're receiving interest. Of course, this is just a very brief explanation to help you understand the general issue. The way to calculate the inflation rate, as well as the way to consider investment options, is to ensure that investments always outperform the inflation rate. Returning to our topic, besides the inflation aspect, this passive income source has another drawback. It differs from home ownership. In the case of home ownership, besides monthly rent, the value of the house will increase in the long term. However, in this case, the value of our principal investment will not change. Or it might even decrease if we choose the wrong investment location with interest rates lower than the inflation rate, as I mentioned above. And this detail leads us to another source of income that I want to share with you: dividend income. It comes from owning shares. So why does owning shares bring us dividends? For those of you who don't know, I'll explain briefly. When you own shares of a company, you are essentially owning a part of that company. Whether it's a little or a lot, you are still a co-owner of the company. And that's why, when a company makes a profit, after deducting all expenses, the profit is distributed to the co-owners. For example, if a company has 10 shareholders and makes 10 million VND in profit each month, each person will receive 1 million VND per month. Again, this is a very basic explanation so you can understand what dividends are. In reality, it's obviously more complex, and not every company pays dividends. I've explained all of this in detail in my investment science book. Returning to our topic, similar to saving money in a bank, the advantage of this passive income source is that you don't need a large amount of capital to start. With just a few million VND, you can start buying shares of companies that pay dividends, and they will periodically pay you dividends. The second advantage is that if you choose the right company, besides the regular dividends you receive, there's another source of growth: the value of the shares you own. This is similar to the situation in the first example where you own a house and rent it out. Besides the regular rental income, the value of the house will also increase over time. Therefore, this method almost solves both the drawbacks of the first and second points. You don't need a huge amount of capital to start, and the value of your initial investment will continue to increase over time. Of course, to do these things, we need to have enough knowledge to find suitable companies to invest in. All three income sources mentioned above have one thing in common: we absolutely need a certain amount of capital to get started. Now, I will share with you some other passive income sources that don't require capital, but before we get into these points, we need to reiterate the nature of passive income. It's not that we don't do anything at all, but rather that we invest a lot of effort and time into it. The initial phase involves building it up to help it take off. Once it's taken off, we practically don't need to do anything more after that. I'll start with the simplest examples to help you visualize. The first example is writing a book. In this case, you're investing a certain amount of time, and if your book is of good quality, people will buy it regularly. It will quietly generate additional income for you. However, this activity has a drawback. Not everyone has the ability to write a book, and not every topic is suitable for publication. This leads us to an activity that almost anyone can do. In fact, Many people are currently doing YouTube, and this activity stems from the fundamental nature of income generation, creating value. In this case, when you create YouTube videos, each video you make must provide some value to the viewer. For example, people watch for entertainment, or to gain information, or to acquire useful knowledge. And when people watch, YouTube will put ads on the videos. Then, the advertising revenue will be shared with you, and so on. Each video you create takes a lot of effort, but once it's finished, it just sits there, generating a steady income for you. Therefore, it's a form of passive income. However, it's easier said than done. It requires a lot of time and effort, especially in the early stages, where it's like a cumulative effect. Besides that, there's another activity, more difficult, but you could also consider teaching about a particular topic. However, this is a bit difficult because, in addition to having in-depth knowledge of a particular topic, it requires you to have teaching and communication skills. I will create a separate article on this topic to share some of my personal experiences on another occasion. By now, I think you should have a general understanding of passive income. As mentioned at the beginning, my goal in this talk is not to list all sources of passive income, but rather to use examples to help you understand the essence of the issue. Then, combining this with your own expertise and knowledge, you can devise your own sources of passive income. Let me give you an example. If you're working in the programming industry, you can write applications to sell. These applications don't necessarily have to be incredibly complex. Sometimes they just need to solve a simple problem, and you can sell them for just $1 to $2. But when you sell them to the whole world, it's like gathering small breezes to create a storm. The income figures can sometimes surprise you. Similarly, those of you who work in design can sell your design samples or icon sets. If you're a photographer, you can sell the photos you take. Many people have already done these things, and they've become excellent sources of passive income. Just be diligent and patient, and you'll gradually build something big. Before concluding, I'd like to summarize some of the main points I shared in today's talk. First, passive income is a source of income that is no longer tied to our limited resources. Second, most passive income sources require a significant initial investment. However, if we are persistent enough to invest wisely, it will continue to generate income day after day without us having to do much more. In my opinion, everyone should have a portfolio that includes a range of passive income streams. Unfortunately, looking around, we see that many people have virtually no passive income. They only have active income streams, or even just one active income stream. To break free from dependence on these active income sources, in the initial stages, when we don't have active income, we can use it to get by, but we must always aim to achieve active income. Whenever we generate income from active income sources, we should dedicate that income to cultivating those sources, following the principle of many small contributions make a big impact. Let's say at some point you create 10 passive income streams that don't require any extraordinary effort. If each stream generates $2 per day, multiply that by 10, and you'll have $20 per day. While not a huge amount, it's equivalent to $600 per month, and I believe that's enough to cover the minimum expenses for most people. Creating passive income streams of $2 per day isn't too difficult, especially in the internet age where anything we create can be sold worldwide. Therefore, the only thing we need is perseverance and diligence. If you diligently pursue this for a long enough period, I'm sure anyone can do it. I hope that this series of articles on income has helped you better understand the nature of income and provided guidance on building income streams for yourself in the future so that you are no longer bound to daily office work. Instead, it will give you freedom so you can proactively live and do whatever you want. I will end my sharing today here. If you find this content useful, please share it with your friends and family. Also, as usual, because YouTube's algorithm prioritizes videos with more likes, if you like this video, please click the like button to help our podcast reach more people. Thank you for watching, and I wish you a peaceful weekend evening.